Sure, at least on the master, the envelope follower separately is superfluous. It's just this now.
Looks cool though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does look cool. Is it working?
Yeah.
It is. Right. I think we can make a start. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good luck, Sean. See you guys. Good luck, Greg.
Cheers, Mark. Thanks for everything. Hopefully, most of you have been here a few weeks ago when I talked about what we were going to do today. And I played a few demo videos of Volta. So this week we are joined by Alex and Dagger from Volta, who are going to talk to us about the piece of software that they're developing. And I showed some demos of this, didn't I, in the class that week, but a few of you weren't here. I did send some links around, so you may be familiar with it, I'm not sure. For those of you who aren't, just briefly, you describe it as a square space for mixed reality, don't you? Which I think is a...
We do, although that's actually changing in about...
Right, I wondered whether that was...
In about a week, and I'll
Sure,
show what
yeah.
that looks like.
But, you know, I'll be brief, but basically the thrust is, I think, making something that's accessible and easy to use and a point of entry for those of us who are not skilled with, you know, games engines and 3D modeling, that sort of thing, to be able to create 3D worlds and use them in various music applications. So Volta allows you to do that. It will take discrete audio and MIDI signals from a DAW or from a DJ set or something like that, for example, and it is an audio reactive 3D world environment. So you can design this 3D world environment and assign various audio cues and triggers so that the visual thing will follow what you're doing audio, follow your music. So and you'll see, you know, this can be used for things like for augmenting live streaming, of course, for you know, live visuals in an actual live event, or being used for offline for making a video, maybe a music video, that sort of thing. So I think it's particularly interesting. It's particularly interesting at this point of time, as this sort of new technology, a bit like the Happy project we saw last week, all of the mixed reality, augmented, metaverse-ready type technologies are going to become more and more prevalent for the way that music is listened to and consumed, distributed and made as well. So I think it's particularly exciting to look at these new technologies coming on stream now. And I think Volta is a particularly exciting one because it allows us to make this sort of interesting 3D content without that really steep learning curve of having to learn all the sort of you know, games engine or employing somebody else to do that for us. So yeah, I'll leave the rest of it to Alex. I think you're going to talk about your story a little bit, how you got to this point, which again I think is particularly relevant and pertinent to you guys who are at the sort of a back end of your undergraduate studies. As Alex will explain, it's possible to take what your ideas are now and take them forward into a career and develop them, and maybe, you know, the things that you have germinating in the back of your mind now could become the next Volta or whatever a few years down the line if you pursue them. Anyway, I've probably said enough. He's going to talk about the backstory, he's going to demonstrate, hopefully show the product as well, so you can figure out how to use it a little bit, and then maybe talk about where next and the future, that sort of thing. We'll do a Q&A afterwards. I'll shut up now. Alex, over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Greg. And yeah, thank you guys for having me. I think you did a great job of explaining what Volta is, and yeah, I guess I'll like Greg said, Greg said, I'll do a demo. I'll also show a version of Volta that we're releasing next week. So it's going to go from kind of being this Squarespace for mixed reality aimed at musicians and performance in general to more like a Lego system where you can actually build the world from the ground up instead of having kind of this templatized world. But I'll actually show you that, and I think it'll probably be the first time like we're showing it outside of Volta and to investors and stuff like that. So, but yeah, so Volta is a self-serve mixed reality creation tool. It's aimed at musicians and performers, but it didn't start that way at all. This was actually my thesis project at the Royal College of Art and Imperial College London. That's what brought me to London a little over 4 years ago. And it was actually a spatial audio mixing tool. One of my professors at Imperial College had made a really good spatial audio algorithm and was interested in kind of looking into what different sorts of interfaces or different designs for interfaces we could explore. I suggested VR, given that spatial audio is an inherently 3D, has an inherently 3D output. So I suggested that the actual editing and mixing of that tool should have a similar process. So what Volta originally was is pretty much just a Unity project where I what's the word I'm looking for? Calibrated positions of virtual objects in Unity to the spatializer. And actually what I'll show you now is, actually I hadn't thought about this and hadn't looked at it for a long time, so this was actually a really good opportunity to kind of refresh this. But I started a timeline of looking at like how Volta's evolved over the last few years. So this is like early experiments in 2018 when I was at the Royal College of Art and Imperial. These were just sort of experiments in how to visualize sound in a 3D space. Early ideas of like what a user flow could be for mixing spatial audio, using this to mix spatial audio, or how the user experience of the user flow, how that would function. Just early sort of concept ideas and how to represent the movement and changing of 3D objects in space over time. This was a demo for my midterm, for my final project at the Royal College of Art. This is essentially what the output was, and you can see how truly janky this thing was. I didn't really know how to program in any kind of sophisticated capacity. I could kind of prototype a little bit, and so prior to going down this path, my final project actually at the RCA and Imperial was completely different. It was I was really focused on misinformation and trying to mitigate misinformation. It was a pretty open program. We could work on pretty much whatever we wanted, and Volta was actually a side project. And I was actually trying to kind of move away from music because my entire background was in music. I've been playing music since I was 8. I play a bunch of instruments, DJ, produce, worked in the music industry. Before moving to London, I did marketing, branding, and design for fairly big electronic acts like Bass Nectar and the Glitch Mob were some of our clients. And I was actually kind of going into this master's to try and do something new, but I kind of just found myself getting pulled back into music and music production and the like. And I knew how to code a little bit, like I'd done some Arduino projects, but when I decided to focus on this, I had to learn how to build stuff in Unity, which I didn't really know. I hadn't touched Unity before this project, and like I played around with Max a little bit, like Max for Live or Max MSP a little bit, but only so far as sort of hacking things together, which is what you can see I've done here, which is a very unelegant way to do this, but it's a very fast way to prototype. And so So this was, this photo here was the, the final design show at the RCA in Imperial. It worked most of the time, so it was pretty janky up until that point. But yeah, anybody could come up and they could just grab the vocals and physically move the vocals around them in space, or grab the drums and move the drums around them in space. You could record motion. That was how it started. These were kind of early examples of Volta kind of transitioning over to being more of a performative tool. So I was really interested in how, upon graduating, I wanted to keep working on this, but I was much more interested in the performative side of music and how you could use mixed reality, game engines, the merits of mixed reality really to augment the live performance. Things like gestural interfaces and physics engines, stuff like that, like really captivated me, especially considering my background was working for big electronic acts where the spectacle of the show was was kind of the point. What musical virtuosity is kind of taken the back seat in the actual liveness of the show to the actual spectacle. And so the idea of being able to like grab an 808 and stretch it, and then an arena would fill with bass, or being able to take like some sort of synth and physically grab it and throw it and it would spatialize around the room, something like that was really captivating to me. And so these were sort of early experiments into that. Ways of making the actual environment itself more visually compelling so that you could use it on like the LED walls at shows, but also start to hybridize these events and add global scale to live events, so that you could broadcast these into different mediums. This is actually my mom playing piano, and I overlaid one of these objects on top of a 360 camera, so that actually it was playing in line with the music. And at the same time, this is about when I started bringing on more people to help me with this. So working on finding funding. I got an investor to put in a nominal amount of money, but enough to start hiring people. So I hired the person who pretty much turned Volta, kind of the janky prototype that was kind of held together by duct tape and super glue for the most part, into something that consistently worked. I brought him on as our CTO, and you can see at that point things just got noticeably more sophisticated. So started hiring. We also hired a lead developer, hired a COO, and everyone was kind of taking relatively small amounts of money in exchange for equity to kind of come on and join the company. We started doing more, again, increasingly sophisticated things as more people joined, and we found like really good developers. So using things like LiDAR to be able to volumetrically put a U into the scene. That's what these examples are here. We had only actually built an interface for Volta. So about a year ago, we still didn't have an executable file. We didn't have like a thing, like an interface that I could like send around. It was still just something that we're kind of building inside Unity. So to go from that to what we have now within the span of a year is been pretty remarkable in terms of what our developers and product development team is able to accomplish. We started doing some projects with Imogen Heap. She started using Volta for some live performances, and then here she actually made a music video with it. But the way that she went about it was really cool. She shot and rendered and streamed a music video live. So she used Volta to perform in live, and she streamed that on YouTube simultaneously, and had kind of her fans in real time giving feedback on every take. And so I think there was like 9 or 10 takes over the course of the day, and I think the 9th one is what they went with, but it was using kind of the fans' feedback of, have more of this effect, have more of that effect. At this point in time, we had gotten into Techstars, which was a huge boost from a business perspective. Our product development slowed significantly, but from getting access to the bigger labels like Warner and Universal and Sony Music, getting access to Amazon Music, getting access to our PR company, who is doing The Weeknd and Daft Punk and all that, was instrumental to kind of getting us more funding. We're currently closing a fundraise now. It also got us some really good visibility into press, like into Rolling Stone and TechCrunch. And so we were also, as a result of us having really good product development, shipping a pretty sophisticated amount of a sophisticated product and good amount of code, we were put in touch with Deadmau5, who we're now partnering with. This is also around the time that we were building our new interface. We were in closed beta for about 7 months, and then it was time. We learned a lot from that process, namely that the thing that we built, while very powerful, nobody wanted to use it because it was incredibly complex in the way that it was perceived. So the biggest learning from that was that we needed to, it wasn't technically difficult to use, but nobody was using it because they perceived it that way. So pretty much all we had, it took us a while to kind of understand what to do, but we changed the user interface and then we made it publicly available so that we could actually start learning from people, start collecting data from how people are using it rather than make assumptions in the product development. We launched in line with this event at 3 Mills Island with Boiler Room. So they used Volta live on stage and used our real-time rendered visuals with the artists. We did a project with Beatport in Ibiza not long thereafter. We were able to now start integrating new, really interesting features into it, like the volumetric stuff into the new user interface, making it really plug and play for anybody just with an iPhone or an iPad to be able to do that. You don't need any sort of sophisticated hardware or anything like that. And I'll show you with my 2017, pretty run-of-the-mill MacBook and an iPhone, how you can put yourself into, this really cool volumetric mixed reality experience. I'm kind of glossing over a lot of things here, but ultimately, over the last 2 years, it went from being this project that I didn't really even know what it was. At every step of the process, I keep thinking I know what we're doing or I know what I'm doing, and then I'll get like 3 or 4 months down the road and realize I had no idea what I was doing then. But now I think I know what I'm doing, and I know in about 3 or 4 months it's going to just be the same thing again, where I increasingly believe what we're doing at the time actually does line up with what we are doing, but it's okay to not really know what you're doing, because it'll lead to pretty big things along the way. For example, in the course of a year, we went from not having an executable file that we could send around to people to use to being named as one of Time's best inventions of 2021. We've been rolled into Tractor, for example. We're working with Pioneer and Serato to do the same. And now what we're doing is really focusing on being able to interact with people on whatever platform they're at. So this is an example of live streams that we've started just doing from our office. and people can actually just type stuff into Twitch or YouTube, and it, without us having to do anything, it automatically has an effect on Volta in pretty much real time. And so that's kind of where we're at in terms of our product development. I've kind of glossed over a handful of things here just for, in the interest of time, but I'm happy to answer kind of any questions about the process of getting from, this being a project to where we are now. I think, I think, how much time do we have? I know we kind of got a bit of a late start, but...
No, we're not pushed for time, it's fine. We've got to 3 o'clock if you need it.
Okay, cool. Well, why don't I give you guys a demo of it, show you how Volta works, and then from there, I'd be happy to show you this new version of Volta that we're releasing next week, which is much more customizable, this sort of Legos version of Volta rather than Squarespace, but that's going to make much more sense in a second. So this is Volta. So what you can see here, again, like as Greg said, the way that we put it is this version of Volta is like Squarespace for mixed reality, where you have a number of world templates. Each one of these templates is like super customizable. What you get here are just kind of starting points of worlds that you can build in this, and I'll show you kind of how we do that. You can save and load worlds, and in this case, I'm gonna load another one that I saved recently because it's a little bit easier to see. But these worlds are made up, each of these templates is made up of world elements, and if I click on an element, you get a list of behaviors here. So for example, this element is like a billboard element, and this behavior allows it to, explode and contract. And I'm doing this manually, but what you can do is you can connect any sort of audio or MIDI source to this. You can use your microphone on your, you can use the microphone on your computer, as I'm doing now. You can use CDJs, you can use Ableton, you can use Tractor, anything like that. We're building direct support in right now. Like I said, we're trying to partner with Pioneer and Serato to have direct MIDI support like we do for Tractor. With Tractor, we have, again, the latest version of Tractor shipped with one of our mappings, so all you have to do is open Tractor, open Volta, and you'll see, actually I'll just pull it up. If I click on Tractor here, and I open, say, one of these behaviors, you can see I have access to every aspect of like a Tractor mapping. And so if you just start using Tractor, you can grab any of that data and use that to control any behavior in Volta. So I'm actually going to open up Ableton and show you how you would use it with Ableton. With Ableton, so I'm going to play a track here, but Ableton's really nice because they give you full control over the, every aspect of the interface. So if I wanted to say click map and click on a parameter, I already mapped that one. You can grab any parameter and use it as a control in Volta. You can also use any audio track. So for example, I think I'm kind of asking a lot from my computer right now. It's because I put the Tractor mapping on. So yeah, you can put like an envelope follower on any track, and it will grab each individual audio source. So if you want to just grab like the kick drum and you want to grab the vocals and have them do separate things in Volta, you can do that. And then we also have a Midi Listener. So it'll pick up like every note, and you can use each individual note in Volta. So if I go back over to Volta, I'm actually going to, actually I'll do it this way. what I'll do is I'll connect the amplitude from the track playing now to that behavior, and you can see it's already starting to pull that data and use it to control that behavior. The way that you start to actually visually customize this is that Volta can pull in any sort of 2D media, so photos, videos, camera feeds, the LiDAR sensors on the new iPhones and iPads we built in as well. So you just go to visual sources, and now here I can pick whatever I want. So if I grab my webcam, I'm now in this portal here. I can use a visual source for anything here. So so now you can see I am in that sort of cluttered, exploding billboard mess there. You can also grab any sort of video content. So if you want to grab like a whole folder of videos, if you have like a bunch of VJ loops, here's a preview window of your VJ loops. And what you can do is you can use that as content on any of the as a texture on any 3D object. So now I'll wrap it around these rings here. And you can kind of see how quickly you can put together like a pretty visually compelling world where everything is kind of responding to whatever sort of audio source you want. You can use that same video source for the entire skybox. Or you can do some pretty creative stuff just with some pretty basic, with an image generator. That's a pretty basic shader that we've built. So I can do the same thing here. So I can make the hue change with the audio, and the offset of the light change with the audio. And maybe I'll throw in another thing here. If you use any sort of like VJ or visual software like Touch Designer or Resolume, we also have native support for Siphon and Spout, so you can pull in any sort of 2D visual creation software as well. Pull that straight into Volta and use that as a visual source. So let's say you want to use this to perform live as well as stream this virtual world. You can use it on LED walls simultaneously, stream it to Twitch, pretty much I guess what we're doing right now. But we have it built into Volta for you to be able to do that. So if you want to have something that's, this is cool, and if you spend more than the 4 minutes I've spent here putting it together, you can get a lot of customization out of it and do some really cool things with it. But this one camera angle might get a little dull after a while, so you can put on director's cut mode. This will change virtual camera angles for you just by clicking a button. And you can also change it to switch every couple of seconds as well. We built Rtmp Streaming into it, so if you use, so you don't need to use OBS to stream. You can if you want to, just by clicking this, but you can literally just start streaming whenever you're ready. Just click this, it keeps your Rtmp stream key in. And if you just want to use this to make cool video content, it renders and records video in real time. So right now this is recording me. And now if I go to my desktop, that clip is right here. Although it's pretty slow right now. There's one more thing I'm going to show you what you can do with Volta, which is how you volumetrically place yourself into it. And the way you do that is we have this iOS app. I'm going to kill Ableton now. We have this iOS app, and you can see how, it might be hard for you to see, but you can kind of see how I'm in red and everything else around me is in purple. What this is doing is it's actually doing a bit of machine learning and and computer vision, recognizing what is and is not a person, and then sending the LiDAR data from your phone to Volta. And what that looks like is, what you can do is you can just grab your device here, and I can actually turn it into the virtual camera, my phone into the virtual camera of the scene itself. So if I move the phone around like this, you can actually see it's acting as the virtual camera in the scene. I can grab, those same VJ loops and use those as content in the scene on the 3D objects. So if I add those in here, obviously there's no green screen behind me, so you don't need to worry about having a green screen. And then what you can actually start doing is do like really cool volumetric effects on the fly in real time as well, and connect all of the amount of that to the same thing, like your audio source. So as I'm talking now, you can see these dots sort of emanate off of me. You can use your visual sources to inform the color of these different effects. We have a few more, and we're building a bunch more as well over the next, over the next couple of months, or indefinitely, really. So one other thing that's also really cool that you can do, right now I'll just fully put myself into a virtual world, and if I turn off control camera, and I kind of turn on these dots here, I can actually pan around a volumetric version of myself, and yeah, stream all this. We do have a VR app that we've kind of deprioritized for now, but we're going to bring it back in about probably 9 months to a year, and you'll actually be able to be inside of this space in VR, and you as an artist will be able to broadcast to Twitch, YouTube, and VR simultaneously. So this is the Squarespace version. The version that we're actually releasing next week, like I said before, is more like Legos for mixed reality. So this is actually being updated kind of on the fly, and it's being updated remotely. So what you'll see here, obviously, in this case, there's just kind of a blank environment, so you can start building up a world from scratch. When I click Add, you'll see a number of elements here. And so, for example, I can grab those same pulse rings and add that in and start building that up. I can add myself as a visual source, or my webcam as a visual source, and put that in here. I think it's this one. Yeah. So you can see how it is taking my webcam and using that. So right now, in anticipation of releasing this, our developers are actually porting over all the different visual elements, Volta elements, into this version. And so, it's what this is actually doing is it's grabbing those elements from our server. And the reason why there aren't a lot of thumbnails here is because it's actually being updated right now, and over the course of the week, this will all be populated. And it just looks to our server and grabs these elements and makes them available to you. You can see anyone that has the down arrow or ones that I've already downloaded onto my computer. And now you can start to build, build worlds from the ground up, put any sort of 2D media on top of it, and use that to perform in real time. So that's sometime next week. I don't want to say Thursday, Friday, that's coming out. I can stop there for a minute, and if you guys have any questions about this, I'm happy to answer them, or how we got to here from this being a project, a school project. I'm happy to take questions on that, or I can keep talking about where we see this all going.
Yeah, I can only assume that there aren't any questions. So yeah, maybe carry on. Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay.
Cool. So let me see what I have here. So the next sort of phase of things for us is we're going to release this, like I said, next week, and we are focusing on kind of two big things over the next year. One is, very easily being able to give people the ability to build a world through this modular world system and this sort of asset library that we're building. One of the other things that we've done over the last couple of months is we've made it incredibly easy for us to make more content to put into Volta. It was taking us hours or sometimes days to make a new element with different behaviors. But now we've essentially made a process for taking any 3D object and turning it into a Volta element prefab, the Volta element in about 1 to 2 minutes. So the amount of assets and content and different behaviors that anybody will be able to pull from is going to grow from, like, our library is like 50 or 60 elements big now to like hundreds or thousands in the next kind of couple of weeks.
Do you anticipate a point at which those 3D objects or elements that you bring in would be some kind of generic file format? And I mean, I'm not sure how that would work, but I'm guessing the reason why it isn't like that now is because you've got to map the behaviors and do that bit before it'll work in Volta. Because there are whole libraries of 3D objects, aren't there? If you could bring those off the shelf, as it were.
So we are doing exactly that, and I can show you what that kind of looks like here. Let me find another element. The objects themselves can be any sort of 3D file format. So like the most common being like .obj or .fbx or something like that. But all that does is that it pulls it in and makes it a mesh that you might not be able to do very much with. What we're doing is we're also creating generic behaviors that you can add to different things. So here, for example, is a rock, and you can see it has built into it position, scale, and rotation. So that's a generic thing that any sort of 3D thing can have. Can move it around. But if you want it to do kind of more interesting things, what you do is you go to add, and here's where you start adding more interesting behaviors. So for example, if you want to add a visual source to put on top of this, I can now take my webcam and I'm now a texture on this rock here. And there are certain other behaviors that we're trying to figure out how to make them generic. So before, in the other example, you saw how there was like a billboard and it would explode with the music. The capacity to make something like that, like to make an exploding behavior a generic thing, is not as straightforward as like putting a mesh together. So in that instance, what we need to do is we need to take a 3D object and then run it through a process where it cuts it up into a bunch of pieces, creates individual meshes for all of those, and then give it logic to move out from the center in somewhat random ways. And so we are doing exactly that. So yeah, you'll be able to add, this sort of undulating behavior, for example, to different things. You'll be able to add, explosion is one of them. Movement, scale, rotation will go on everything. But yeah, the goal is to make this, as customizable as possible in terms of world building and putting yourself into that world, while still being, orders of magnitude easier than using like a game engine like Unity or Unreal to do it. So yeah, that's kind of one of the big focal points for us is release this, learn from it. We have no doubt that there's going to be bugs and friction points and stuff like that. over the next few weeks and months. That's kind of going to be a priority, is ironing those out. But we're actually starting to do things like offer the capacity to share worlds and eventually buy and sell these worlds. So Beatport is one of our partners as well, and we've been talking to them about being a point of distribution and sale for modular worlds. So that's actually one of our monetization models, is essentially acting as like an asset store for individual assets in Volta, as well as buying and selling different worlds. The other big focal point for us, and also our other main monetization model, is around audience interaction. So as I mentioned, kind of an early version of using existing platforms to stream to and audience interaction to manipulate that was with Imogen Heap, where she was making this music video live in real time. Because all of this renders in real time and can stream in real time, she was in LiDAR in her studio, filming and putting this experience on for her fans, and then taking their feedback, and we were manually adding that in. What we've moved to now, like I'd mentioned, is the capacity to automate that. So people can actually just type predefined keywords and their effects into, say, the chat window in YouTube or in Twitch or something like that. And every time someone types the word boom in, then the artist gets to choose what effect that has in the world. And that's really where a lot of this is going, in that our go-to-market strategy is around music, but I personally really believe that mixed reality is going to become an art form in its own right, on par with music and gaming and theater and movies. And the only way that that's going to happen is if the tools are democratized, because right now, if you want to do anything comparable, it costs 6, 7, 8 figures, to do what Lil Nas X did in Roblox, or what Ariana Grande, did in Fortnite, or Marshmello in Fortnite. And so while that, is cool and a novel kind of capacity, I don't really think personally that there's going to be a whole lot of artistic merit to kind of mixed reality until more people have these tools, and also recognize that the thing that sort of pulls mixed reality into, like, the thing that's significant and special about it is interaction. Otherwise it's just a passive experience. It's a movie. It's and so the capacity to co-create with an audience, the capacity to kind of perform in an interactive way, blurs a lot of gaps in in the same way that mixed reality has already blurred the lines between different entertainment genres. So if you think about what entertainment increasingly looks like, there's and it's all based around game engines. So there is movies and games, concerts and games, sports in games. There is, to some extent, it kind of flips the other way as well. And it's really sort of thinking of interaction as an artistic process that will make this an interesting and novel art form. So those are kind of the 2 points that we're starting with. Like, obviously, like, just being able to type something into a chat window in YouTube or Twitch it's all right. It's novel as well, but it's a little gimmicky. It's really sort of thinking beyond that, where this gets really exciting for us. One example that I like to give a lot is on Reddit. Reddit does these social experiments every year. On like April, I think they do it on April Fools every year. On April 1st, they'll kind of put some different social experiment out into the world. And one year they did this thing called the button, and all it was you opened Reddit, and on the top of the homepage was a countdown timer from 60 seconds and a button. And the only rules or the only explanation was everybody gets one click of the button, and no user accounts made after today will get a click. So pretty much only the pre-existing usernames or user accounts get to click the button. That was it. That's all that they said. And so you know that there's hundreds of millions of user accounts. So while it does seem like it's somewhat infinite, there's an exhaustive amount of accounts. So that means that at some point, people will run out of clicks, or the number of clicks will run out. And it became very obvious that someone would click it and then the countdown timer reset. So that means that at some point the countdown timer is going to reach 0. And nobody really knows what's going to happen when the countdown timer reaches 0, but you know that it's going to happen at some point. And so for the first 4 days, the countdown timer never got below 50 seconds because millions of people, they'll click. And then when people did click, it got a little dot next to their user icon. And then after about 4 or 5 days, it got below 50 seconds. And those dots went from being purple to being orange. And from 49 to 40 seconds was orange, from 39 to 30 seconds was yellow, and so forth. And you started getting all this really kind of goofy but really creative, interactions between people, right? Like everyone, like the purples and the oranges started having this weird sort of rivalry in the subreddit, in the button subreddit. And then there's a lot of prophesizing about what would happen when the countdown timer reaches 0. And this whole thing went on for I think it was months. I think it finally reached 0 in June because everybody, all of the clicks ran out. And so there's all this prophesizing and all of this sort of weird conversation and creative sort of, goofy feuding between different sects that emerged out of this thing. And then it finally reached 0 and just nothing happened. That was it. The whole point was just to kind of see what kind of came from all of this. And I think that's just kind of with these unbelievably basic constraints, you get millions of people involved in this collective project where there's just all this creativity that comes out. And so, you take that sort of mindset and significantly less basic kind of constraints, and you can imagine what sort of collective projects can come out of that, what sort of art can come out of that, one that's not just defined by a single person, but that you either as an audience member or an artist gets to feel like you're involved in, and really kind of blurs the line between who is the artist and who's the audience. So that's kind of the stuff that we're focusing on over the next year in terms of our product development and how it relates to that sort of thing. The longer term kind of ambition, or I don't know if this is ambition or just more sort of speculative thinking of where this all can go, is if you take this to its logical extreme and you kind of look at where hardware technology is going, we have a VR app. We are not particularly bullish on the fact that VR will become ubiquitous in any meaningful way. We do think that AR probably will. And so the capacity to kind of broadcast these environments and save kind of, these modularized worlds that can overlay on top of your world, you put all of that together, and Volta effectively becomes a reality editor. If you want to walk through the streets of London in a psychedelic jungle or something like that, then you just download the psychedelic jungle world that someone made. Or you can make it and sell it, and make revenue off of your psychedelic jungle world that you can allow anybody to walk through the streets of London with. And so, for me personally, that by itself is kind of wild to think that that's within the realm of possibility and not in that long of a time. But it kind of just, again, for me, goes back to why, I guess, why I personally ended up here doing this. I always wanted to do philosophy and design. That was like the two things that I was interested in. When I was in college, I'm from the States. College is expensive there. My parents, I was very lucky that my parents paid for my tuition. But studying philosophy, my parents are doctors. They don't, they're not as open-minded as, what the use of a philosophy degree would be. And essentially, what I chose to study was a little bit of a compromise. I studied political science purely so I could study, philosophy, political philosophy. And then eventually went back to do my master's in design at the RCA and Imperial because, at this point, I wasn't 18. I have a little bit more control over my life. But so ultimately, I got to do, the thing that I wanted to do, which this combines those two things. Like building stuff in mixed reality, when you really kind of think about it, is applied existentialism. You have to explicitly choose how the world works. You have to choose all of the logic of it. And that's kind of what excited me about sort of building kind of a framework for doing that and being able to offer it, to anyone, but in an artistic form. So yeah, with that.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So do you see Volta being a sort of because I think this is what you were intimating, a democratized version of the Fortnite or Roblox gig for anyone to be able to do? So I guess that would mean that people who were joining you by whatever means, could they sort of avatar themselves into it in a similar way or something like that down the line? Is that?
Yeah, maybe at some point. I mean, right now, like the way that you would involve yourself is, we're not building like a 2D platform. We're not building like a Fortnite or a Roblox or a Twitch or a YouTube. We give you the capacity to stream to any sort of, 2D streaming platform that can, that can take an Rtmp stream key, so Mixcloud, YouTube, Twitch, whatever. And in the short term, the form of interaction that you can have, as a starting point for us is just being able to write stuff into the chat window, and the artist chooses what effect that has. But yes, I mean, in the long term, the capacity to actually insert yourself volumetrically and actually, spatially, especially when like we kind of reprioritize the VR app and potentially the AR version of that whenever an AR headset does reach kind of critical mass at like a consumer level. Yes, that's kind of where this is going. And other kind of technologies that will enable that are things like 5G is a big focal point in terms of like looking at like what the capabilities of that are, because you look at something like that and it's easy to kind of take for granted how much something like half a second of latency affects, can affect what you can do in a thing that's supposed to be shared in real time. So like if you've ever been on, whenever you're on the phone and for some reason there's sort of like that weird sort of half-second lag, you can't have a conversation. It's just too jarring and frustrating. So things like latency from 0 to half a second to 1 second, 1 second to 2 seconds, 2 seconds to 4 seconds. Each one of those provides different constraints and to some extent opportunities for what types of interactions you can have. And so, 5G actually becomes, this ubiquitous technology. For us, that means near zero latency data transfer, and that will allow something like that. But that's going to be a while for us to build kind of the frameworks for it, but also the technology itself needs to, to catch up.
What about spatialized audio, sort of binaurally encoded spatialized audio?
So that we have kind of explored that a little bit. There's kind of there's a few kind of ways to think. That is something that is on our roadmap. The way that we send data, actually, earlier I'd mentioned that we're partnering with deadmau5. The thing that kind of got him really interested was he didn't believe that there was really at this point in time any meaningful way to send a whole spatialized environment, over the internet without having like a meaningful amount of latency. Like I think he said you couldn't do it with like less than 8 seconds. The way that we've kind of constructed Volta makes it so that you can essentially do it in under a second. But we've kind of the way that we're doing it is rather than right here you can see like we're sending like a full this is a full spatial environment. You can, if you were in VR, you could pan around it and go through it. But what we are actually sending is just the instructions for how the world needs to be combined, which is rather than sending the whole world itself. And so that allows us to have like super low latency, but then it kind of gives us constraints like pretty much a stereo audio for now. That being said, we could definitely put things in the world itself to that can not just be sort of visual objects in the scene, but can actually emanate different audio. But being able to connect something that can output spatialized audio or multi-track audio, like an Ableton plugin or something like that, is just going to take a lot more engineering work. But that's totally like doable and probably on our roadmap, but not for this year.
Sure. Now, I'm thinking of other things now. I think, what about this? Because this technology kind of makes you think that way, doesn't it? I'm now wondering whether it would be possible to do something where there are multiple sources of music. So there's multiple people collaborating with some kind of audio performance online. A bit like the Endless live.
I was actually going to mention Endless. Yeah. So Tim Exile, who's the CEO of Endless, is a friend of ours, and we've talked a lot about what work we could be doing together. And we haven't really had they're very focused about going down sort of like the NFT and tokenization route now. We are as well, actually. Well, we're exploring that, and the capacity to do things like mint experiences. Or be able to build kind of smart contracts into you being able to build and sell a modular world or something like that is something that we're really interested in, as an aside. But yeah, so Endless, so Tim and the Endless team and us have talked a bit, and that's definitely something that we're definitely interested in. We just haven't had the capacity to.
Of course.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff, I have to say. Any questions from anyone else? Can you see? Sorry, go on.
When we were exporting the video, I saw that was it in Big 4?
Yeah. So this.
Just on MP4.
Yeah, I think right now all we're doing is exporting MP4s. Yeah, you can change the resolution a little bit, so landscape, portrait, and like square, but at least for now, it's just MP4s.
How do you see this for support of modders potentially as well? I mean,
So,
like people that are modding potential environments themselves later on. You see very often with like games, for example, a lot of people like build communities and like actually build new features into that. Is that something you have been thinking about as well? How the community later on can actually further interact with that and then actually build completely
yeah, I mean,
apart from like just what you essentially provide.
yeah, so I mentioned that the capacity to build an asset, and then for us to build an asset and build a bunch of behaviors for it and put it into the world, for the last year or so, it's taken us anywhere from hours to even days to do that, and now we've kind of built a way to turn that into a prefab, in a minute and load it to our server. That's one thing that we're going to put on the front end at some point. So anybody will be able to upload their own 3D assets into Volta and build worlds that way. I think at some point we would love to do the same thing for behaviors as well and interactions. That, you know, we, as much as possible, are trying to get away from being the people to make the content, because it's, you know, it's slow for us and costly. And if our user base is then just making the content for us, then the, you know, the amount of customization is effectively infinite. So the first step towards that is to take the 3D asset upload and make that a publicly available part of the interface. But then, yeah, I mean, as much as possible, we'd encourage that. Again, the point of this is like, I think we can start to try to begin to normalize the idea of experience itself being a canvas. And if Volta can be, you know, the paintbrush, then what that means is that it should provide as much customization, not just in terms of what's available in the world, in you know, the platform itself, but being able to change the platform as needed or wanted by, you know, the people who want to build this sort of experience, these experiences.
You sort of talked about the types of sources that it can have, and one of them was video, and I'm wondering if you have any ideas about support for like multiple participants and that kind of thing. Is that something that you're...
So we can, let me think about how to put this. You can actually now kind of use Volta as a vision mixer if you wanted to. Like if you had multiple like video sources, like multiple cameras plus your webcam, or you're using, you know, your camera plus XSplit. Well, I guess you couldn't use your camera plus XSplit, but multiple cameras or what have you, and pulling those into Volta, you could do that. Is that kind of answering your question?
No, maybe like from a single source of video to kind of detect different types of things that would modulate the world, I guess, within a single source, potentially.
I'm not fully sure I understand. Are you talking about like the computer vision stuff?
So like imagine like you're in a show and there's just a crowd, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The crowd is potentially like an infinite amount of
right, of information or data points.
That changes.
Yeah, so actually one example to give, so that would actually, so the way to think about it is you have the 3D world, and you have visual sources that you can use as textures on that 3D world, and then kind of separate from that you have the behaviors that can, you know, however much this rock explodes or something like that can be dictated by, you know, a MIDI controller, an audio wave or something like that. And so that would just be kind of another behavior source. I think that is something that we've sort of thought about, but the way that we're thinking about it is more in terms of like interactions and the data that right now we can pull from different 2D platforms. So for example, with Twitch, the chat window is like one way to pull an interaction. You know, there's different Twitch extensions that allow you to, say, like click on the screen on Twitch, and we can pull the XY coordinate from, you know, where everybody's clicking and use that as user data. We can, you know, every number of people on the live stream can be represented as, you know, stars in the sky or as different things, as, you know. So the short answer is maybe not that specifically, but yes, like different ways to impact the world itself in real time. That's like what we're focusing on over the next year. That's not only you know, something that I think will be pretty interesting, but that is actually going to be one of the ways that we monetize Volta, which is, you know, you as an artist can choose how many bits to pay, how many bits to charge for an interaction. So if you wanted to have your name written in the stars in the sky or something like that, you know, you as an artist can say that interaction costs £5. And so it's creating another revenue stream for artists that's also globally scalable. and then we monetize from that. So that's one of the ways that we're planning on deriving revenue. Yeah.
Just in the vein of collaboration, right? So streaming Twitch and yeah, some of the audience. Did you have like, say, if you want to collaborate with, say, an artist, have them just bring up their vocal or something? So obviously they would be like broadcasting. You'd be obviously be like the master broadcaster. Would you like decide what their image or how that was to be represented within Volta?
Sorry, can you repeat that? It's a little hard to hear you.
In the vein of collaboration, so like I've got my beat set up, I've got Volta assistant playing, and I'm gonna bring in, say, a vocalist, a singer.
Right. So you're saying if you just wanted those vocals to have some sort of impact in Volta, like how would you potentially do that as separate from like your existing setup?
Essentially, yeah. Well, we both be live streaming, so to speak.
So I mean, depending on what your setup would be. I mean, if you're live streaming and you are, I think one of the kind of holy grails of live streaming and collaborative music making is being able to, find a way to have low enough latency where you can do that. Like you need to have to be able to like jam together remotely, like sub 20 millisecond latency, so that but regardless of that, if you're pulling all of that, if you're capable to do that, and you're pulling, different people together collaboratively, remotely, you're probably running that into some sort of DAW, right? Like Ableton or something like that. In Ableton, you can take the envelope follower. We have, you can take, oh, right, I should do that. I was going to pull up Ableton, but in Ableton, we have an envelope follower that you can place on each individual track, and then just pull the waveform data from each individual track. So if you're pulling the vocals in from someone remotely and you're running it through a DAW, then you could do that. I mean, right now, specifically Ableton is the easiest to do that with Volta. But in theory, you should be able to do that, I think, with really any sort of DAW. One other thing I do want to mention before we wrap up, if we have this form here that has a few questions around, around the platform, around like what you guys like. You are in effect like our target market, like people who want to kind of go deep on really interesting audiovisual tools. So there's some questions on here. If you guys are down to scan the QR code and answer that, that would be very much appreciated. But yeah, forgot to mention that before. But yeah, do you guys have any other questions?
Are you putting your hand up there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I noticed you mentioned like 3D models and stuff that you're working on. Is there any like limitations that you found with like file size of these 3D models or stuff like that you get on?
So file size, not really. Anything that so actually that sort of wavy thing that you see in the back there, that one specifically, when you try and run a lot of audio data through it and you make the light diffuse, is very processor hungry. So there are things like that not all of the elements are sort of created equal in terms of how kind of processor hungry they are. In terms of like, in terms of the file size and stuff like that, I don't think we've had any real limitations. It's more when you try and add luminosity and lighting and particle effects and stuff like that. That's where it gets a little processor hungry. But like I said, this is on this computer's a 2017 MacBook with like run-of-the-mill specs. It's and it really only gets bogged down when I'm trying to, like, with this new version of Volta that we're putting out in a week, I've like tried to like add as many elements to it as I can to see kind of at what point it breaks, and so far it's actually pretty performative. So nothing that we've used yet has really broken it. this one and like one or two others in particular, when you add like different effusive qualities and stuff like that. Yeah.
We should say they can still download it for free and use it at this point, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's free. Please download it. You can download this version, and then you can get the other version in a week, and you'll be able to build worlds from the ground up in a week. But if you want to just get it, start playing around with it, and like kind of wrapping your head around it, it's totally free. There is no like freemium and premium version. Yeah, just go to volta-xr.com and you can download it and grab everything you need to get it running on whatever your setup is, if it's Tractor, Ableton, what have you.
Excellent. Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much, Alex. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done, aren't we, for the day? And if you haven't got any more questions, everybody. Brilliant stuff. We've only got one more week left, haven't we? A major project. I should just say, before any of you head off, next week we were going to have Mike Exarchos, but you may or may not know he's left. He no longer works for us as of yesterday. So I think what I'll do is a Zoom tutorials rather than come here next week. So I'll announce it on Blackboard, but we'll do a tutorials with me on Zoom if you need it for next week. Other than that, thank you very much for the demonstration. And thank you very much. I will see you next